I was watching a video last night, which I think was from Stanford University, I don't know, I can't remember. It was on Blip TV anyway. And it was a guy called Sopolsky talking about relationships between genetic predispositions for diseases and certain religious tendencies. There's a number of bits to it really, and some bits aren't really relevant to what I'm thinking about. But one of the things he was talking about was how certain genes, if fully expressed, are diseases and therefore counteradaptive. But if only partially expressed, they do give kind of adaptive advantage. And he gave the example from fully biological diseases. I think he cited Tay-Sachs disease, which in its full-blown form kills you, of course, but when only partially expressed, apparently correlates with a resistance to, Tay-Sachs, resistance to tuberculosis. He also cited sickle cell anemia. Is it sickle cell? I think it was sickle cell anemia, which again in its full-blown form kills you, but in its partially expressed form gives resistance to malaria. And there was another disease as well, I can't remember what it was now. Can't remember. But it gave, in its full-blown form, it kills you. In its partially expressed form, in that case, it seemed to correlate with a resistance to cholera. And really, what that part of it was the suggestion that that provides an answer for the question, why would genetically delivered diseases not just naturally die out because of the negative effect they would have on the ability of the organism to survive and reproduce. You would think that genes that killed you would not go on to survive in the next generation. The kind of resolve to that was that as long as the balance is right, as long as the majority of people who are carrying that gene carry it only in its partially expressed form, such that it provides adaptive advantages, then overall it doesn't have an overall negative effect on the survival possibilities of that gene if a few people have it in a fully expressed form. And as I say, he was talking mostly initially about diseases, and it was really clear, I thought, that. The other thing about genes, which he mentioned, which is, I think is potentially relevant, in terms of the survival advantage of, all genes, I suppose, but certainly these partially expressed genes, is that he said there's no such thing as a good or a bad gene. All there are good and bad gene-environment relationships. So a gene that serves you well in one environment would not serve you well in another environment. Okay, so where's that going? Oh, yeah. So what he was talking about beyond that point was genes for schizophrenia, and he was citing this very extensive survey that had been carried out. I can't remember the details of it, but it was a survey of family members of schizophrenics, including schizophrenics who had been adopted. And there were certain tendencies found in family members, well above statistical norms, tendencies found in family members of schizophrenics that wasn't found in family members of adopted schizophrenics. Therefore, it does appear to be genetic. And it was a certain character type, or a personality type, or a brain type, or a cognitive set, or whatever they were calling it, which he referred to as schizotypal. And it has the same kind of relationship that full-blown diseases have to partially expressed diseases. A full-blown gene for schizophrenia would produce schizophrenia, which is obviously very counterproductive, very maladaptive. If it doesn't kill you, it certainly disadvantages you enormously. But partially expressed as a schizotypal personality can, under certain circumstances, i.e. in favourable gene-environment relationships, confer advantages. And here he was citing mostly from the literature, the anthropological literature, on shaman, and how the activities of shaman, descriptions of shamanic behaviour, the type of individuals who are characterised as shaman, seem to fit the same profile as schizotypal individuals, family members of schizophrenics without the full-blown disease. And in certain circumstances, in certain cultures, certain times, it seems to be advantageous, or there is a market for it, let's put it that way. It does become possible to sell oneself as a shaman, to speak in tongues, to carry out rituals, ritualistic behaviour, various things that shamans do, and not be negatively affected by that. Right, you two, let's go down here. So, and he led on from that into a whole range of discussions about shaman in different kind of cultures, or like a similar kind of role that shamans fulfill in different cultures at least. With this indication, strong implication that those roles are still fulfilled in modern Western society. That these aren't characters and individuals who are found only in what you might call primitive or pre-industrial societies, which we tend to think of them. But those same individuals carrying similar kinds of, potentially at least, carrying a similar kind of schizotypal set of traits, set of behaviours, adopt similar roles within society. And there's no clear cut-off point, unfortunately. So I think, for example, he talks a little bit about David Koresh as an example of a borderline schizotypal schizophrenic expression of those genes, which in that very particular time and place, for that very particular small community of people, seemed to serve some kind of function. He certainly, if the rumours are true, he certainly seemed to have access to lots of females, so he presumably was able to spread his genes. I don't know what the story of that is right now, but there's no evidence of that personality trait, that genetic expression dying out in that sense. It was very adaptive. It served a function. He got a job, if you like. He was protected and supported by that small cultish society. Why am I talking about this? Well, I was thinking about this. It partly, well, two reasons actually. Partly, and it was to do with arts practice. And there's two things to do with that. I don't know if I can get to them both here. But one was to do with a slight problem I have with it in terms of arts practice, because a lot of the things I read, and here I'm citing people like Ramachandran, Semyazeki, one or two other people, Steven Pinker maybe, who talk about arts practice as, well, almost as a kind of misfiring, almost a kind of evolutionary adaptive hangover. So we would enjoy looking at art because it's satisfying certain propensities we have for order, or for patterns, or for certain kinds of landscape or certain kinds of behaviour. It would satisfy those desires, and those desires ultimately are adaptive in the sense that they help us find mates or find food. Art isn't an end in itself in that sense. It's just, well, it's quite kind of the equivalent. I think Pinker talks about this. It's kind of the equivalent of sweet or fatty foods. We eat sweet or fatty foods, and we like sweet and fatty foods. Not because sweet or fatty foods are good for us, or that we should be eating them. Not as ends in themselves, but because they fire the same pleasure receptors, which, when we were hunter-gatherers, would have driven us towards eating berries, or driven us towards eating certain kinds of food. So it's just overstimulating those pleasure centres, those reward centres, those adaptive behaviours. So I think some of the writings talks about art in these terms, that we like art because it's doing that thing, really. I have a problem with that because I don't think art is a misfiring. I think it has an end in itself. I think there is something, I don't know what it is yet, I haven't got that far, but I have an investment at least in thinking that art isn't just the accidental byproduct of overactive genetic adaptive behaviour. But the other thing about this shaman thing, which I found particularly interesting, is that, no, actually I'll talk about that in a different video. I haven't really got my head around that one yet. But the idea that kind of partially expressed. So let me just see if I can recast what I just said in terms of the Sopolsky put it in his lecture. If he's saying that fully expressed schizophrenia results in certain kinds of behaviour, and partially expressed schizophrenia in the right context is adaptive, I'm just thinking how that relates to arts practice. Is arts practice the kind of usefulness of arts practice? I mean, I know it has kind of social functions and economic functions and all those things, but but fundamentally, most of it is quite useless, apparently. Is that usefulness an indicator that it's simply a fully expressed form, a full-blown form of something which, in its partially expressed form, is much more routine and mundane, to do with prediction, to do with binding of stimuli into wholes, to do with the ability to analyse